Is kindness really the torch that always lights our way, or can it sometimes lead us straight into the shadows? We're told from childhood that kindness is unequivocally good, a guiding principle that helps us navigate not just our individual lives, but the world at large. Even the most basic stories, the fairy tales that shaped our early sense of morality, drive home the message: kindness is good, cruelty is bad, and those who stray from this map inevitably lose their way. But what if these lessons, repeated and rewarded in our early years, are not quite as universally true as we've been led to believe? Here's a question that may unsettle you. Is kindness always good, or can it become a liability? It's tempting to dismiss the question outright. Of course, kindness is good, we insist, a sign of strength, empathy, even wisdom. And yet, there's an old, persistent undercurrent in the world's thinking that challenges this certainty. Niccolo Machiavelli, for instance, was bold enough to suggest, laying it out in cold, uncompromising prose, that kindness, or what he called virtue, might not always be the straightest road to success, at least not when it comes to leadership or wielding real power. In The Prince, he takes a scalpel to the assumption that virtue alone is enough and exposes a landscape where survival, effectiveness, and order sometimes demand more than just gentle intentions. If you pause and consider this for a moment, it makes a strange kind of sense. Imagine for a moment a leader whose only guide is kindness, a person who, out of a desire not to hurt others, is reluctant to make difficult decisions. This leader might shy away from necessary conflict or fail to punish wrongdoing, all in the name of being good. But what happens when kindness leaves injustice unpunished or weakness unaddressed? History is replete with cautionary tales: the generous king whose lands are overrun by unscrupulous rivals, the well-meaning politician undone by merciless opponents, the parent whose boundless indulgence leaves their child unprepared for life's challenges. There is a paradox in kindness, Machiavelli suggests, and it is a dangerous one. When survival or stability is at stake, whether on the throne, in the boardroom, or within our personal lives, kindness can become not a virtue, but an obstacle. This is where the conflict emerges, between the morality instilled in us by tradition and the cold, often uncomfortable calculations that power sometimes requires. If you were to lead a nation, a company, or even a house, should you always act kindly? What truly is at stake when we adhere blindly to kindness at all costs? Are there situations where being too generous opens the gates for treachery, or where softness is mistaken for weakness? These are hard questions, the kind that force us to look at our own beliefs with new eyes. Machiavelli's thesis isn't a condemnation of kindness, but an invitation to see it differently, not as a rule to follow at all times, but as a tool to be used strategically. In his view, the most effective leaders are those who possess the flexibility to respond with both toughness and compassion as circumstances require, who use virtue when it serves the greater good and set it aside when survival demands. Perhaps a ruler must sometimes be feared instead of loved, or make decisions that, while appearing harsh in the moment, protect a greater number of people in the long run. In this light, public morality and private morality may not always align. The choices that keep a kingdom safe are not always the ones that win hearts in the court of public opinion. So, as we begin this reflection together, let us not shy away from the uncomfortable. Instead, let's look squarely at the complexities and contradictions that swirl around kindness, virtue, and the exercise of power. Is it truly possible or even desirable to be uncompromisingly good in a world that so often rewards cunning, adaptability, even ruthlessness? And what becomes of societies, organizations, or individuals who refuse to see virtue as anything but absolute? As we move ahead, keep these questions alive. Let them simmer in the background of your thoughts, because unraveling their answers requires us to move beyond platitudes and confront the difficult, often ambiguous terrain of real moral choice. This is not just a philosophical exercise. It is an invitation to reconsider our own lives, to notice the ways in which our desire to be good sometimes ties our hands, and where a more flexible, nuanced morality might serve us and the world around us better. We won't find easy answers here, perhaps not even tidy conclusions. Instead, we will navigate together the strange, shifting boundaries between duty and expediency, kindness and strength, the world as it is and the world as we wish it were. And as we undertake this exploration, ask yourself, in the moments that matter most, is it enough to be kind? Or is there wisdom in Machiavelli's cold-eyed counsel, a wisdom that dares us to be, if not cruel, then at least brave enough to see beyond the simple binary of good and bad? Let's move forward and see where the path takes us. Let's venture, then, into the dark and fascinating terrain of Machiavelli's argument, a terrain where the well-trodden paths of conventional goodness suddenly give way to something far more ambiguous. He asks us boldly, what does it truly mean to be a good leader? If you find yourself recoiling at the question, remember, the very discomfort you feel is the point. Before we denounce Machiavelli as cynical or heartless, let's pause for a moment and consider the weight of leadership, not as a classroom exercise, but as a lived, constant struggle. Machiavelli slices through sentimentality like a surgeon. He tells us bluntly, politics, at its core, demands more than virtue. It demands effectiveness. The prince who survives is not the one who clings to moral absolutes, but the one who acts, at every moment, in service of his people's security and the state's continuation. We instinctively wish the world would reward gentleness and self-sacrifice. Yet history, with its unsentimental memory, is lined with the names of rulers whose kindness became a liability. Take, for instance, the ill-fated King Louis XVI, whose offers of compromise in the early days of the French Revolution were met not with gratitude, but with contempt, his mercy perceived as feebleness, a green light to the guillotine. Or look to Tsar Nicholas II, whose hesitance to wield necessary ruthlessness in the face of upheaval led not to salvation, but to devastation, both personal and national. Why does this pattern return, age after age? Perhaps because excessive kindness, uncoupled from strength, is a tempting target. People trust you only as long as you seem capable. The moment your benevolence abides insult or chaos, it can breed disrespect, even rebellion. Are there not moments, as much in personal life as in politics, where giving yet another chance, or a softer answer, only strengthens those who would undermine you? Can we afford to be endlessly forgiving if it becomes a license for others to injure us or those we protect? Machiavelli's insight here is as disturbing as it is clarifying. Traditional morality is not an absolute, immutable, pristine, descending from the heavens. Rather, it is a social invention, a tool that can foster stability or become a weapon for control. Consider how, across different centuries and cultures, what counts as goodness morphs according to the interests of those in power. The rules, in other words, are written in ink that is anything but indelible. It fades and shifts, susceptible to the twin forces of necessity and ambition. Our impulse to universalize what is right or wrong is natural, yet it can blind us to how those very norms are bent at the will of circumstance. What, then, does Machiavelli advise the ruler, the aspiring leader? It is necessary to be kind only when it is expedient, only when it fortifies your position and secures your mission. For our own lives, does that mean we must be cold? Not at all. It means we must judge when our mercy is wise, when our generosity builds rather than destroys. A leader, Machiavelli insists, must be prepared for his kindness to be a tool among many, not the sole instrument in his hands. Let's look at that oft-quoted assertion. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. At first blush, it sounds monstrous. Who would wish to be feared? But Machiavelli is not advocating cruelty for its own sake. When love falters in the face of crisis, when the people's affections are fickle, swayed by rumor or hardship, fear, or rather respect grounded in authority, remains a sturdier foundation. To build a house on the sand of popularity is perilous. Better to have the granite of awe and discipline, so long as it does not descend into hatred, which brings its own certain ruin. Of course, even here, nuance is everything. The truly effective leader is not a tyrant who rules by terror, but a figure who inspires enough fear to forestall betrayal and enough admiration to secure loyalty. Consider Alexander the Great. His city-sacking campaigns were balanced by acts of magnanimity to former enemies, forging unity from the ashes of conquest. Julius Caesar, legendary for both his clemency and his iron will, knew when to pardon rebels and when to stamp out opposition with uncompromising force. These men, far from monsters, knew that to achieve greatness, one must sometimes don the mask of severity, even as one keeps a vigilant eye on the pulse of one's followers. What of us, modern heirs to these ancient quandaries? Whether we lead a team, a community, or simply ourselves, Machiavelli's message remains. Effective leadership demands adaptability, the courage to do what is necessary, not merely what is comfortable, the wisdom to balance compassion with shrewd calculation, the humility to accept that what is right may look very different depending on the times and the stakes. Ask yourself, the next time you hesitate to make a hard choice, is your reluctance virtue or simply fear of appearing cruel? Are you preserving harmony or unwittingly inviting chaos? It would be easy to misread Machiavelli as a mere advocate for ruthlessness, but his true counsel is fiercer and finer. Learn to wield kindness, not as a shield, but as a weapon, granted strategically, withheld when the greater good demands. Stability and legacy depend not on unthinking benevolence, but on the rare and strange strength to see reality as it is and act accordingly, whatever history may say. But let's pause and look at the question from another angle, as every honest inquiry must. If it's true, as Machiavelli suggests, that morality is not an absolute compass, but a tool in the ruler's kit, what then are the dangers of disengaging entirely from moral principle? Consider for a moment what history teaches us when power is pursued in a vacuum devoid of ethics. Do we not see an echo of this in the tales of tyrants who, having stripped their actions of moral restraint, found themselves ensnared by their own cruelty? The world remembers them with a shudder. There's something repellent in cold-blooded cunning masquerading as strength. Idealists like Confucius or Gandhi stand as sharp counterpoints to Machiavelli. For them, morality is not mere strategy, but the very foundation of legitimate power. Confucius, you may recall, insisted that a true leader rules by virtue, inspiring rather than intimidating. If the people sense their ruler's sincerity, they follow with willing hearts. If not, loyalty withers. Gandhi, facing the might of empire, made kindness and truth his weapons, tools not of expediency, but of unyielding principle. Can such ideals triumph in a world as unruly as ours, or is steadfast morality itself a luxury, ill-suited to the messy realities of governance? Consider the non-violent marches in India, the salt that stung not just wounds, but the conscience of the mighty. Did moral rigor weaken Gandhi's hand, or did it make him unconquerable? But morality, as we practice it, is rarely pure. Consider the difference between strategic kindness and what seems genuinely heartfelt. If a leader attends a tragedy-stricken village and offers comfort with cameras flashing, is this an act of virtue, or is it performance, carefully orchestrated for later headlines? Now, think of the less visible acts: a discreet pardon, a letter, an anonymous gift. The real world overflows with both kinds. And yet, which is more effective? Which leaves a deeper mark on the souls of the governed, or on the leader themselves? Even if kindness begins from calculation, can it sometimes shape the heart? Or does performative virtue gradually erode character? Is it possible, perhaps, for a shrewd appearance of kindness to breed genuine feeling in time? Here, the distinction between perception and reality becomes treacherously thin. Power, after all, often depends less on what is than on what seems. Ask yourself, how many times have you judged a leader not by their inner life, but by their public face? A ruler known for mercy, regardless of its depth, may buy peace and loyalty more reliably than the most ruthless despot. But it is equally true that appearances can serve as camouflage for tyranny. The world's stage is crowded with figures who wore masks: emperors in the garb of saints, philanthropists with fingers crossed behind their backs. This ambiguity leads to the question of moral flexibility in leadership. When, if ever, is it justified for a leader to bend or break principle, to deceive, to withhold, even to harm, in the name of the greater good? History is replete with such episodes. Churchill facing the horror of World War II, authorizing bombings that cost innocent lives, arguing necessity over strict ethics. Lincoln suspending habeas corpus to preserve the Union. Were these betrayals of morality or hard choices compelled by responsibility? Where does resolve cross the line into ruthlessness? The very act of governing seems to demand a kind of tragic wisdom, the ability to weigh lives against lives, to hurt now in hope of healing later. For Machiavelli, virtues, kindness, honesty, even faith, are not sacred commandments, but practices to be adopted or discarded as context requires. Virtue is a social construct, its value determined not in an abstract vacuum, but in its effects. Do you too sense the danger in this? If all values are instrumental, what stops their erosion? But equally, if virtues are rigid, do they become brittle, breaking in the storm? The needle swings. Too much pragmatism and justice is lost. Too little and power itself dissolves. Let's bring the discussion to ground with some living examples. Consider Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, praised for lifting a nation from poverty, derided as authoritarian for harsh crackdowns. Was his leadership admirable for its results, or compromised by its means? Or look to more recent times, certain tech moguls or philanthropists burnishing reputations with grand gestures, even as their labor practices or business choices remain questionable. Is it the substance or the spectacle that counts? Should we judge leaders by their intentions, outcomes, or the way they navigate the treacherous waters between the two? At every turn, we're confronted by ethical dilemmas. When does pragmatic governance become mere expediency or even injustice? If kindness or honesty is just another tool, do we risk cultivating cynicism in both leaders and the led? Or does rigid adherence to principles simply invite defeat by those less scrupulous? The truth, perhaps, sits in tension. The art of leadership, the art of living, may require the subtle wisdom to know when to wear the mask and when to cast it aside, when to yield to harsh necessity, and when to insist, come what may, upon the gentle path. Ask yourself, in your own life, when have you benefited from strict honesty and when from a gentle lie? When has compromise built bridges, and when has it hollowed out meaning? These questions do not vanish in the corridors of power. They simply grow larger, their stakes more urgent. In the end, it is not enough to wonder whether kindness or authority matters more. We must ask how we ourselves would wield this dangerous, dazzling interplay between virtue and necessity, image and substance. How would you decide, standing at the threshold where all choices matter most? We often imagine ourselves at the crossroads of crucial decisions, moments where the path ahead splits not just into two roads, but into 1,000 meandering trails, each disappearing into a different future. At the heart of these moments lies a central question. In a world riddled with the machinery of power, shifting alliances, and relentless ambition, can kindness survive? Or, perhaps more pressingly, should it? Imagine, for a moment, a newly appointed leader standing at the edge of their influence. With every step, the world's eyes bear down. Supporters urging compassionate reform, critics sharpening swords of suspicion. The burden of thousands weighs upon a single promise. Will they lead with kindness or steel themselves against the harsh demands of reality? This is not a distant historical abstraction. It's a scenario that lives in every boardroom, every political movement, and, dare I say, every family dinner where authority clashes with affection. What, then, is the true place of kindness in a world where power so often seems to reward ruthlessness? It's easy, comforting even, to believe that morality and kindness should be our unwavering compass. We teach our children to share, to say please and thank you, to forgive. Society thrives on these gentle gestures. But as the stakes escalate, as responsibility grows heavier, does kindness retain its integrity, or does it risk morphing from a virtue into a dangerous liability? Let's walk for a while in Machiavelli's shadow. His infamous advice, that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both, has echoed across centuries. He wasn't advocating amorality for its own sake. He was describing the messy algebra of survival in the corridors of power. When resources run thin, when enemies encircle, when a well-intentioned gesture could lead to ruin, the calculus changes. Imagine a leader in wartime whose instinct is to spare every life, to pardon every crime and rescue every soul. Noble, yes. But if that kindness signals weakness, if it emboldens the ambitious to sow chaos, what then? Is the preservation of a gentle heart worth the collapse of a fragile peace? Yet the story is rarely so simple. Consider the countless moments when strategic kindness has changed the course of history. A conciliatory speech that prevented conflict, an olive branch that dissolved enmity, a generous amnesty that transformed former adversaries into allies. Was this kindness born from pure benevolence, or from a clear-eyed understanding of what served the stability of the realm? Here lies the paradox. Kindness, used recklessly, can destroy, and yet, when wielded with skill and timing, it can achieve what brute force never could. The real artistry of leadership, Machiavelli might argue, is not the rigid adherence to any single moral principle, but the capacity to read the moment. Compassion at the right time can pave the way for enduring strength. At the wrong time, it paves the path to downfall. Have you seen it in your own life? Perhaps there was a time you gave second chances too freely and found yourself exploited, or maybe you withheld mercy and later lived to regret the wound it left. How do we balance the heart's natural urge for goodness with the mind's demand for prudence? So what key lessons emerge from this reflection as we come to a close? First, kindness is not an absolute in politics or in power. It is a tool, neither holy nor profane, awaiting the judgment of circumstance. It is the wise, discerning leader who learns to wield morality strategically, who recognizes that there are moments when compassion can heal and unite, and others when necessity calls for restraint, even severity. This is Machiavelli's uncomfortable gift to us. Not cynicism, but clarity. Therein lies the paradox at the center of the human project. Too much kindness, or kindness deployed without discernment, risks becoming not a blessing, but a curse, a soft spot for predators, or a flood that drowns order in well-intentioned chaos. But rigid cruelty, the cold steel of unfeeling pragmatism, offers only a brittle peace. Is morality always an obstacle, as the cynics claim, or is the true challenge to strike a subtle balance, one that bends, never breaking, to changing needs? Are we brave enough, imaginative enough, to seek that balance? I turn the question over to you, not just as a thought exercise, but as a living question that each of us carries into every day. Should we reconsider our fierce attachment to the traditional view that morality must stand unyielding in the face of power? Or is there wisdom in learning to interpret our moral compass according to the tempestuous weather of circumstance? Perhaps the final insight is less about kindness or cruelty and more about adaptability and self-awareness. The willingness to reassess, to shape one's actions in light of consequences, and to accept that ethical decision-making at its highest is always a work in progress. We are rarely offered the comfort of clear, binary choices. Instead, we are invited into the difficult and exhilarating task of judgment. So, as you go forth, whether as a leader of many or simply the leader of your own life, consider what it means to use kindness as a tool, to bend it thoughtfully, to set it aside when necessity demands, and to take it up again when the world has need of healing. Are you ready, truly ready to do this? Are we, as a society, wiser for loosening the chains that bind us to rigid commandments and instead harnessing the full, living complexity of our moral intuition? These questions ultimately have no final answer, only the stories we shape together in pursuit of a fair, flourishing world. The exploration does not end here. I invite you to carry it into your decisions, your judgments, your acts of kindness, and your moments of doubt. The future is as open and uncertain as ever. May you greet it not with unbending certainty, but with courage, adaptability, and the wisdom to wield kindness, not as a shackle, but as a powerful living guide.